In today's podcast, we are joined by Matt Mason. Matt is a multi-hyphenate adventurer, public lands advocate, and bicycle advocate. We talk about his recent efforts in the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument, and he answers all of my questions about bikepacking. Stick around.
Look for me in the mountains, where walking has a way of pulling you to your peace of mind every day.
Welcome to the Backpacking Light podcast. I'm Andrew Marshall. Ryan Jordan won't be joining me today as he's off putting the final touches on the brand new Backpacking Light website. As it happens, that website is launching today, May 27th, 2021, and if you haven't had the chance to go check it out yet, you really should. It's very, very cool, features a brand new modern layout, and a lot of new features. With that said, let's dive right in. One thing I'm experimenting with this year is bikepacking. Bikepacking is exactly what it sounds like. Overnight or multi-day self-supported wilderness travel, just like backpacking, except instead of walking with a pack on your back, you are riding a bike. I'm a long-time mountain biker, but I've never bikepacked, and I was curious about the similarities and differences to ultralight backpacking in terms of both gear and philosophy. So I called up Matt Mason for a chat. Matt is an experienced backpacker and thru hiker who turned to bikepacking as a way to travel further and get deeper into the wilderness while operating on a tighter time constraint. He also spends a lot of time advocating for bicycle infrastructure in Las Cruces, New Mexico, where he lives, and he's the creator of the Monumental Loop, a long, brutal, and beautiful bikepacking route through the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument outside of Las Cruces. Our chat functions as a rambling bikepacking 101 class, and towards the end we get into a discussion about public lands use. I'm excited for you to hear it, so without further ado, here's my conversation with Matt Mason. Matt Mason, welcome to the Backpacking Light podcast, and can I just start off by saying that I think your beard is fantastic.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I don't work on it at all, so that's my strategy.
Yeah. Well, this wing of Backpacking Light is a big fan of long beards. So
good.
Yeah. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about your journey from backpacking? I know you thru hiked the Colorado Trail at some point, and how you kind of went from that into the world of bikepacking.
Yeah, I guess I've always been a cyclist and on some level, but I got into long distance hiking sort of in the early 2000s. Hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2007, Colorado Trail a couple times after that, 2010 and 11, I think it was. But around that time in 2010, I moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico. And there's a lot of good hiking here, but most of it's off trail. There's not very much water, so stringing together a long hike from here is pretty tough. So I hopped on the bike, basically a mountain bike at that time, and started riding a little more. I had a couple life changes that don't let me be out for 6 months or 3 months or whatever at a time. So switching to the bike let me get some bigger adventures in a shorter amount of time. That's sort of the idea.
So that was sort of the impetus, and then once you started seriously switching into the biking, I'm curious as to the similarities and the differences that you found between bikepacking and backpacking, maybe philosophically, maybe gear-wise, just sort of anything.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities, obviously. You're using mostly the same gear, except for the bike instead of a backpack. So a few things change there, but all the basics are the same on gear and sort of the ethics behind what you're doing. It's still centered on leave no trace and low impact travel, human powered travel. There are some significant differences. Downhills obviously are dramatically different, and what you see along the way and sort of the feelings you have, I think, are a little bit different. How you connect with the land. A lot of people talk about the difference between traveling at the speed of a car when you slow down to a bike, that, you see so much more. But I think there's that same gap and sort of that same, missed opportunity when you slow down off the bike onto foot. You're just so much more connected to the landscape, I think, on foot, even than a bike, you know. And on a bike, you're still seeing a lot, but you're missing quite a few things too. So they got the noise of the tires and the hubs, and so you're not hearing as many sounds as you would be otherwise. For me, it's a more social thing too on the bike. I don't mind doing long hikes by myself. You know, all the long hikes I've started, I've gone to the trailhead the first day and there's people on the way, but I've started by myself. And I'm more hesitant. For some reason, I haven't identified exactly to do that with a bike. I don't know what that's about exactly, but maybe it's just I've gotten older and I don't want to be by myself as much out there, but it's more social on the bike, I think.
So, yeah, you mentioned a few things that might discourage people who were really into the savoring the connection with the land type stuff. But what do you find about bike packing that, other than the social aspect, that really connects with you as opposed to backpacking?
I just like riding a bike. That's a big one. And
there's like an intrinsic joy in bike riding, right?
Yeah, for sure. There is. And the big one for me is that I can start what feels like a pretty big adventure almost always from my house. So if I were to hike even the nearest public land, there's a little mountain, you know, it's 2 miles away, and on my bike I can be there in a couple minutes, you know, 10 minutes or less. And then from there I've got 500,000 acres. But if I'm walking, I can't cover nearly as much ground, and I almost always have to drive to a trailhead to start. So bikes, you can just hop on and go and kind of see a lot of territory in a short amount of time. So that's a big one for me.
Yeah, and part of that is, some of that's where you live. Las Cruces is got kind of amazing access to the wilderness, pretty like right out the door. But like you said, I mean, even if you had 5 or 6 or 7 miles from your house, that's much more doable on a bike than it is walking, for sure.
Much more, yeah, much more.
Let's get into some of the details of, if I was a backpacker, a lightweight backpacker, and I was interested in bike packing, it can feel very overwhelming. So I'm actually in the middle of this process right now. I'm like exploring this whole world. And, as part of my job, I'm pretty darn familiar with gear and backpacking gear and backpacking skills. But I started to look at bikes and got overwhelmed very quickly. So what are some ways to mitigate that feeling of being overwhelmed when you start going, I don't even know where to start?
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, there are a lot of resources out there that will help you. And the good part is you have a lot of the basics down. If you're a backpacker making the transition, especially if you're already a cyclist too, then you pretty much got it in the bag. But even if you're not a cyclist, if you're a backpacker and you're ultralight already, then that's a good start. But really it just comes down to getting a bike and figuring out a way to put the gear that you've put in your backpack for however many years and miles onto the bike. And that's going to take trial and error, is really the only way to figure it out for sure for yourself. Because there isn't one way to do it. You know, there's various ways to put things on your bike. So
yeah, so there's kind of like the DIY way, the make your own gear way, and then you can start dropping cash on frame bags and things like that. So did you kind of go through that journey?
I did, yeah. And there's still, and it's sort of like the external backpack idea, you know, that idea is still around in bicycle touring, where you put a rack with sort of oversized bags on it, and you put that on just about any bike you have. So that's sort of the simplest way to start. But once you start getting into bike packing specific bags, it is sort of a journey. It is, you know, you have to sort of take the gear you have, see how much space it takes, see what bags fit your bike. There are a lot of variables into making it work. And even every trip I go on now, I do pack something just a little differently. I'm like, oh, I could move this here or that there and try some different stuff.
So on a bicycle, you've got a couple of different areas that you can strap things down, right? So you mentioned the rack, and I want to circle back around to that because I imagine there's pros and cons to putting a rack on the back of a mountain bike, essentially, or whatever bike you have. But can you just kind of like list sort of the general places you can strap things down and what kind of goes where? Like, is there a better place for a shelter on a bike?
Yeah, and I think the rack thing is probably not, I mean, especially for ultralight backpackers, is probably not the way that most of them are going to go. So if you're going to soft bags, is sort of what they call them, with no rack, the main three spots are the handlebar, under the seat, and the main triangle of the bag, sort of the main frame where the water bottles would normally go. Mm-hmm. And you sort of wanted, the idea is to keep the weight as low and, the heavy weight low and in between the wheels, if possible. So food, water, if you have a heavier shelter and can get that in the frame, that's a good way to go. Most people end up running like a bedroll and clothing on the handlebar, and then, various things in the seat bag. But water and food definitely low, and tools low in the frame bag.
So if you don't have a frame bag, what's a viable way to strap that heavy stuff kind of into that central frame area?
Without a frame bag, it can be hard. They have cargo cages that are sort of like an oversized water bottle cage. Mm-hmm. And those will take, anywhere from like a 5 to 10 liter dry bag. And then you can strap that to the cage. And most bikes will be able to hold that because most bikes have water bottle mounts. So that's another way to go. And it's quite a bit cheaper to do that too.
Right. So if I had to make one purchase to help me carry cargo, a frame bag would probably be a good way to go. And then I can kind of DIY the rest of the stuff if I have to.
Yeah, I think so, because I don't think you can DIY a frame bag that well, unless you have a sewing machine and hours and more patience than I have.
Sure.
But you can get a Sea to Summit dry bag or whatever, 10 liter dry bag, and strap it to the seat fairly easily. If you have a couple of those voile straps or voila straps or whatever they are, strap that to the seat and then do another one of those to the handlebars, and that will get you through all but the roughest trips. Just a couple of dry bags strapped to your bike. But the frame bag, it's pretty useful.
Yeah, and there's a whole world out there of cottage frame bag makers and custom bags for the specific model and year of your bike and what kind of suspension it is and all that stuff. And all of that strikes me as kind of like either you've just decided to drop $2,000 on this sport right off the bat, or that's something you kind of work your way up to as like a custom frame bag. So what are some frame bags that you can start with? They're kind of like just have a general shape that you need, that you will fit almost any bike you have. Does that exist?
Does exist, yeah. Revelate Designs out of Alaska has just sort of stock frame bags in various sizes. A couple other companies do. Rockgeist maybe in North Carolina has one. There's probably a frame bag maker in your area, which is what I always tell people: reach out to that person and see. But there are some stock ones available that are quite a bit cheaper that will fit most bikes. And that's a good way to go. The cool part about a frame bag, too, is once you have it, if you ride for day rides or even commuting to work, it's a super handy bag to have. It makes it. I put them on almost all my bikes now, even if I don't go bikepacking on them that much, because it's just a handy thing to have. You can put a lock in there, put some snacks in, whatever it is. So it's kind of a handy bike item anyway.
And it's nice to not have to be carrying a backpack. That's sort of another thing I found in my research is that carrying a backpack, even if it's lightweight on a bicycle, is kind of, I don't know, is the word frowned upon that I would use? Like, it seems like it's not really trendy.
Yeah, most people try to avoid it. I avoid it completely. I'll occasionally wear a small fanny pack. But if it's your first trip and you already have an ultralight backpack set up, you can just throw that on your back and go. It's not going to be super comfortable, and it makes it a little harder on your behind on the saddle because you're getting a little more weight that way.
Got it.
But it's doable, and people do it all the time, especially if you're ultralight, and you're doing some trail like the Colorado Trail or something that has a lot of hiking. It's not so bad, to have a little backpack.
Yeah.
So that is an option, but.
Let's talk about bikes. There's an idea in the bike packing world, at least the resources I've looked at, that I really like, which is, and you mentioned it earlier, if you already have a bike, just take it out there and get out there. Like, don't let the bike that you have keep you from getting into this sport. That being said, can you talk about maybe some of the different styles of bikes that people use for bike packing, and like maybe what styles or what pieces of engineering are more suited for certain styles of bike packing?
Yeah, I can say that it's true not to let the bike stop you. My first trip was on a 3-speed coaster brake, like commuter bike with, 26 by 2.0 tires, slick, meant to ride to campus and back, and then I did a trip on that, and it was so much fun. No problem, Now, though, if you have to choose a bike for bike packing, like the standard choice is sort of a mountain bike, ideally with wider tires. And that's sort of been the big thing that's, I think, played a big role in bike packing boom, is big, wide tires. So you can have a fairly simple frame, with no suspension, and still have a comfortable, soft ride that goes over almost any terrain, sand or snow or whatever it is. So the wide tires and low gearing has been the, sort of reliable drivetrains with a wide range single ring in the front. Those two have been big.
And it's possible that you even just said some words that like went right over people's heads. So
sure.
So can we back up and talk about like, what's a drivetrain? What's a front ring? Things like that, just to kind of like make sure we all on the same page.
Yeah. So most bikes come with like a multiple geared system. You can get a single speed with one chain ring in the front where the cranks are and one cog in the back. That's like the most simple drivetrain you can get. Just a chain, and then, just sort of how you would draw it as a kid, just this oval shape of a drivetrain. And then most people are going to bike pack on multiple speeds. So it's going to have the big cassette on the back wheel with all the little cogs going up, and a shifter. And then you can sort of select which gear you want, and that'll move the derailleur and move the chain. And now they have very simplified drivetrains compared to what they had 15 years ago. You used to have multiple chain rings on the front, mm-hmm. and a front derailleur, and then a smaller cassette in the back. So you had 3 gears on the front and 8 to 10 on the back. And now they've all gone to 1 gear on the front. So you don't have the front derailleur. So it's lighter, it's simpler, it's easier to maintain. And then you have a much bigger cassette in the back. So you've got 11 or 12 gears in the back to choose from. And then just one shifter on your bike to select the gear you need.
So if I was hitting garage sales looking through Craigslist for a bike packing bike, assuming I don't already have a mountain bike, or maybe I have a mountain bike that's made for downhill, and it's gonna suck up a lot of energy as I try to bike pack with it. I'm looking for something with no suspension in the back, maybe or maybe not a suspension in the front, thick, wide tires, and a modern one chain ring in the front, and then a lot of gears in the back. Is that a simple way of saying it?
Yeah, I think that's would be good. And the wide tires, we're talking 2.6 all the way up to 4.8. Mm-hmm. So they can be very wide. Mm-hmm. And those tires should be tubeless. That's one other thing. So we're not running any tubes in tires anymore. You just put the tire on the rim, put some liquid latex sealant in there, and that has almost eliminated flats and changing tubes and patching tubes. And so that's another big one, I guess.
One of the things that I like about this type of bicycle is how simple they are, and there's just less things to break on them, which I think anyone listening to this podcast is realizing is probably a good thing. You know, if you're out in the middle of the woods 3 or 4 days from a trailhead. I know that you sometimes ride even without gears in the back. Do you suggest that for if you're going to really get out there?
Yeah, I like it. It's the simplest way to go. Then if you run into mud or any sort of adverse trail conditions, it almost has no impact on your ability to keep riding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to me, because you can get so far out there so quickly. You know, you can be 50 miles away in a day, but then if your bike's broken, you're several days walk back,
right.
or, you know, pushing a bike,
right.
can be kind of horrible. So yeah, I would recommend riding single speed, but the new 1x11 and 1x12 is what they're called, Drivetrains, are pretty reliable. They are, but you have to have, that's the other thing you have to have that you don't carry when you're backpacking, is all the tools to repair the bike. And you got to know how to use them. So I'm not really that good with fixing a derailleur.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I say, well, do I want to learn how to do it and get better at it and take that risk, or just avoid it altogether? And you can avoid it and still have a trip, but there's trade-offs all along the way.
Sure. I imagine you're doing a little bit more pushing your bike if you've only got one gear in the back, right?
Yeah. I mean, almost every trip I go on, I'm walking part of it. I mean, most of the time the geared riders are too, you know, if you have the gears. Sometimes it's too steep or too rocky, or it's just not worth, you know, putting out that much effort to go, you know, a couple miles an hour faster than I am walking. But yeah, walking is definitely part of it. On the Colorado Trail, I think I walked 50 miles on the bike trip. You know, I'm riding 500, but I probably pushed at least 50.
Yeah. Yeah. I hiked the Colorado Trail in 2015, and for the first 2 days, there was a group of bikepackers in front of me, and I actually would catch up to them every time there was an uphill, you know, and then they'd pass me on the downhill, and we sort of flip-flopped back and forth for a few days. Resources for learning how to use those tools and learning how to do repairs in the field. Do you have anything that you would recommend?
Yeah, bikepacking.com does a pretty good job. They have some YouTube videos and a bunch of stuff on their website. Locally, I think I would just recommend going to your local bike shop and asking the people there. There's probably somebody at the shop that's interested in bikepacking. You know, once you look at the online sources, that's good, but doing it is a different thing. You know, that goes, you watch a YouTube video and they say, just unscrew this, and you try, and it immediately doesn't work. And if that happens in the field, it can be game over, really.
So you are recommending that people go in, and what do you say to someone at a bike shop? Hey, I want to learn some basic bike maintenance. Is that something they'd be amenable to, or what?
Yeah, I mean, most bike shops have sort of, you know, regularly scheduled clinics on fixing a flat or repairing your chain or those sorts of things. Or there's a bike club in town that does it, and they'd be happy to tell you. You know, if you said, I'm going on this bikepacking trip, and you've done some research, you know, on bikepacking.com, or there's another one that does a good job. But bikepacking.com has everything you need. And then if you have, you know, follow-up questions, to me, it's worth going and having that relationship with the bike shop and asking them and saying, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm doing, and telling them what's going on.
Do you have any bike brands that if just our hypothetical backpacker looking to get into bike packing, he's looking through Craigslist, he's looking through eBay, are there any brands that just like pop in your head as like, oh, these are generally pretty solid, affordable, good bikes that will hold up to, you know, a lot of abuse?
Yeah, Surly and Salsa, both a QBP brand and available at many bike shops, are sort of the ones that are the easiest to obtain, and they're affordable and they're durable, and they set them up for bike packing. Almost every Surly has little mounts on the fork even, so you can put extra water or extra gear on the fork and on the down tube, and all these little extra places they've set it up to make it easy for you. And they're you know, still a couple $1,000 maybe, or $1,500 for a Surly. But they're on the more affordable end. and they're ready to go, normally right out of the box.
Sure. I mean, $1,500 may seem like a lot until you realize that you could easily drop $6,000 on a brand new bike.
Easily. Yeah.
Easily. Yeah. One of the things that I know about you, because I follow you on social media, and we used to live in the same general area, though we never bumped into each other, is that I know you're an advocate for bicycling and public lands and accessibility and stuff. And I'm just wondering if you see any way to make cycling more accessible to people, because it does seem like there's a pretty big barrier to entry to the sport sometimes, be it in the cost or like the knowledge barrier or things like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a great answer. I agree with you that that's an issue, and it is a barrier for many people. And there are lots of programs out there that are giving kids bikes, or, Leo Wilcox has a scholarship to help people get bikes and gear. And there are lots of those sorts of things. But more broadly, I'm not really sure. We host a series of rides here in town, like Thursday night gravel rides, where we'll sort of show people the routes from town to the monument. And we use rental bikes if we need to, or, borrow a bike from a friend, and just try to be as generous as we can with the gear and, time we have to show people, hey, you can get from downtown to the monument. And then once they see that, they, do a few of those, and then they want to come back and, oh, you're camping out there on the same route. And then we take them camping and loan them a bunch of gear. But short of that, I really don't know if there's like a one easy answer how to take those barriers down.
Sure. I mean, there rarely is, right? Pink Bike is a resource that, again, says I'd never even heard of it, and except for the fact that I knew they were the guys who made the Trail Fork app. But as a non-cyclist, I was not aware of Pink Bike, but it's essentially a Craigslist for bicycles. And I'd been hearing since the pandemic started, oh, there's a shortage of bicycles. No one can get bicycles. No one can get bicycles. Well, there's 10,000 bikes on Pink Bike. Yeah. Maybe you can't get the newest, trendiest bicycle, but you can get something that's going to get you from point A to point B pretty easily, right?
Yeah, you can. And I agree. I think there are a ton of bicycles. Most of the people I know right now, the cyclists, if you said, hey, I need the parts to build the following bike, they would have all the parts in their garage, or they would have, I even have a frame. So people are just like holding on to all this bike stuff. I don't know. That sort of bothers me. If I'm not riding a bike or using a certain component on a regular basis, I try to just give it away or pass it to somebody. So that's another way you could break those barriers down, is, give away with some of what you have, basically.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's maybe sounds ridiculous to people, but I've been privileged enough to have it, and I still have everything I need. Right. I guess I don't need boxes of spare tires and all that stuff. If it would get somebody else on a bike, I'm happy to just give it away. So.
Right. Well, you mentioned the monument a little earlier, and I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about public lands a little bit. You live right on the outskirts of the Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument, and you've been involved with advocacy for that land, and even in creating a route through that area. So can you just give us just touch base a little bit on the background of the Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument, and then maybe talk about the monumental loop and what you and the people you're working with are trying to achieve with that?
Sure. Yeah. I think the monument started, the initial push was like in the early 2000s to designate some of it as wilderness area. And that sort of stalled out. There was some opposition from ranchers and different groups, and that sort of stalled out. But then in 2014, President Obama basically declared it a national monument. And then you have the Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks is like made up of 4 different units. So you have the Oregon Mountains sort of on the east side, and then there's 2 or 3, I think 4 other mountain ranges scattered around the sort of the western side of Las Cruces. that are also in the monument. So you've got 4 different units basically surrounding Las Cruces in every direction. But those units are separated. So I had the idea at the time to connect them with a big hike. I'm like, I'll just hike through and connect all these and see all the mountains on one trip. That was more difficult than I cared for it to be. And then once I got on the bike, it made it pretty easy, and the route was already there, using existing roads and trails. So since then, people have been coming to ride it. A couple of people have done a long run on it. It's been a lot of fun.
And you're working with Friends of the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument or the New Mexico Trail Alliance, or both? Yeah,
sort of both. I mean, I'm just sort of doing it by myself for fun. Both of those groups are interested and like the idea, so they've been helping out. You know, they're legit nonprofits that can do more than I can do by myself. Yeah, they've been great partners, both of them.
Is there a plan or a hope or a dream to get some sort of designation for this thing that you just kind of came up with? Some sort of national scenic trail something?
Yeah, I would like that to happen, because once the monument happened in 2014, this is sort of a, economically depressed area a little bit. It's struggling to find like a sustainable source of money for the future. But once the monument came, visitation went up. And then wilderness was designated in 2019. About half the monument's now wilderness. So I sort of see the monumental loop as like the third piece in that puzzle of, come to Las Cruces and check out what we have.
I didn't realize that there'd been a wilderness designation. That's fantastic news, because when I was out there, a lot of it was BLM land, so there was a lot of motorized transport and stuff like that.
Yeah, now about half of the monument, close to 300,000 acres, I think. Some in each section of the monument is wilderness.
Wow, that's really great.
Yeah, it had no impact on the biking. That's, sometimes biking and wilderness can rub each other the wrong way, I think, but the route fit perfectly with the designated wilderness.
Right, which is to say that the route that you created just already went around where the wilderness areas were?
Yeah, I'd seen where the wilderness study areas were and tried to not go into those, and essentially all of those were adopted as wilderness. So so now the monumental loop borders, I think, 7 wilderness areas, which is pretty cool.
That is cool. I wrote a piece on the monument a few years ago, and one of the things that stuck out to me was the cattle grazing out there. And just like anywhere where you talk about public lands and cattle grazing, it's contentious. But for some reason, Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument, for as little well known as it is, it ended up, I remember, I think, didn't Ryan Zinke actually come out there, and wasn't there something where he met with ranchers, but he didn't meet with other interested parties or something like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly who he met with. He did come. I think a council person, Gabe Vasquez, I think, did meet with him, and went on a hike with him or something. He was certainly pro rancher when he came, but
yeah, I mean, I wonder, I know that you have thoughts about cattle grazing on public land because I follow your Instagram page. So I guess I'm just, I feel like your take is usually nuanced and reflective. You don't just sort of spout off. You don't use talking points. So I think I'm interested in maybe hearing what you have to say about that.
Yeah, it's a tough subject. I mean, there are people here that have been ranching for a long time, and they sort of think in their minds that they have access to the land and they're contributing to the community. And I don't know. I went to school and studied wildlife biology, and that shaped sort of some of where I'm at on this, but I'm not seeing it being compatible in the long term, facing climate change and all the issues we're facing. I'm not seeing cattle ranching being compatible, especially in riparian areas or wilderness areas. I'm not seeing it being a compatible land use. And it is, and it's written into the Wilderness Act. that cows are allowed, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then when you start looking into the details about how they're arriving at their stocking rates and how many cows are allowed and what it's actually doing to the land, it makes even less sense, I think. But
do you have resources that we could put in the show notes for this episode where people could do some of that research and look into some of that stuff for themselves, like places that are reputable?
Yeah, I could probably find you something. I don't
Okay.
have it off the top of my head,
Okay.
but
yeah. Okay. Well, we'll put something in there just so people can do a little reading.
It's worth reading about.
Yeah. Well, so what is, first of all, I was very amiss, and I should have said that this is all happening in southern New Mexico, right around the El Paso area, just to give people a kind of an idea if they're not familiar with Las Cruces right off the top of their head. But is there a timeline for any of this monumental loop? Like, are you, what's the next steps for you, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, believe it or not, I'm kind of just making this up as I go. You know,
I believe it.
Yeah, I'm a stay-at-home dad. This is all just kind of started as a fun project. So I'm not sure. I'm still just working with friends, meeting with more people than I care to meet with, and talking about what a good idea this is, talking to businesses about, you know, how it's going to help them. So it's just basically spreading the word right now. And we have, you know, politicians at every level saying, yes, this is a good idea, but there's really not a mechanism to make it happen. There's a couple, you know, the long trails have the National Scenic Trail designation, and there's other, you know, National Recreation Trail, there's other designations. Trying to make one of those fit in this case is, you know, fairly difficult. So there's not a clear path forward. So it's just kind of been this process of building support and momentum and seeing where it takes us.
Well, if people wanted to follow along with the journey and be ready to offer support if you ever need to ask for it, is the Instagram account sort of the best way to know what's going on?
Yeah, I occasionally post stuff on Facebook too, you know, different events we're having. Instagram's sort of it right now. We're working on maybe having a website or maybe having a website, you know, or part of a website with the bike shop, sort of getting on with them. But yeah, Instagram's sort of the best source right now.
All right. Well, we'll definitely put a link to it in the show notes. And if people are interested in helping out, they can reach out to you. You know, you never know. Maybe someone has some ideas.
I welcome any of those ideas.
Well, we'll wrap things up. I won't take too much more of your time, but if you had to give one piece of advice to an established, experienced backpacker who wanted to explore bikepacking, like just as a summation, what would you say?
I mean, I guess I would say try it. You know, that would be it. Just give it a try. If you have a bike, put all your stuff that you're used to carrying in your backpack and just go out there and give it a try. It's going to be different than backpacking, but it's worth trying for sure. And if I had to say something to bikepackers, I would say to them, get off your bike more and hike. You know, combining the two, that's really, to me, where the action is. So we have these 7 wilderness areas. All I can ride out to the wilderness border, throw my bike down, and then hike the wilderness from there. So I don't have to drive, and I'm not really doing a big, you know, whole big bike packing thing. And I'm getting the wilderness side. So combining the two, to me, is the thing that seems to be missing the most, that I would say to everybody.
I love that. That's next level thinking. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like the pack rafting thing, you know, where they're combining, you know, different ways to move through the landscape in one trip, and I love doing that. I mean, so flat pedals versus clipless pedals, that's one that I wear flat pedals so I can jump off my bike and climb a peak or scramble down a canyon or whatever part way along the way. So,
and clipless pedals, we should say, it's kind of confusing. but they're pedals that you clip into, but they're called clipless pedals. Yeah.
I hate it. I hate the name. I hate I don't like anything about it. Yeah. So it sort of locks you onto your bike. If you're doing technical terrain, it can be easier to control the bike a little bit, but then you can't really walk anywhere in those special shoes.
Right. They're special, like they're really hard shoes, right?
Yeah. The soles don't bend at all. They don't have any sort of traction. There's a little metal cleat in the middle, right where you'd want to be stepping on things. So
well, now you've got me spinning off into footwear. So we'll talk for another few minutes because I do have this question. So do you ride in just like shoes that you would hike in?
Yeah, I normally ride in approach shoes or, you know, like a light trail runner. Then you get a little more protection for your foot. They are a little stiffer on the bottom. Some of them anyway. The ones I have from 5'10", they're fairly stiff on the bottom. But they're great for hiking still, you know. Around here the hiking we're doing is often involves some sort of scrambling or rocky terrain. So that works pretty well. In the summer, I'll wear Chaco sandals. They work great. They work great. So I guess, I mean, bikepacking really can be anything. It can be, that's sort of the cool part about it. And what makes it difficult is it can be whatever you want it to be. If you want to ride in sandals and ride 5 miles of gravel and camp in right outside of town, it can be that, or, you know, so starting is the thing.
Awesome.
Just getting going.
Awesome. Well, this conversation's been a lot of fun, Matt. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We'll make sure and put links to the Instagram account and the Facebook account in the show notes. And I would just say to everybody, if you've never been to southern New Mexico, you got to get out there. It's a wonderful, amazing, magical place.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for having me.
Yep, no problem. All right, we'll talk to you later.
All right, see you.
All right. That's going to do it for this episode of the Backpacking Light Podcast. The Backpacking Light Podcast is advertising free thanks to the membership fees paid for by Backpacking Light members. A BackpackingLight.com membership gives you access to 20 years of archives, forums, and online courses, so please consider supporting this podcast and become a member right now at BackpackingLight.com/subscribe. You can download the show notes for this episode at backpackinglight.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It really, really does help other people find the show. Thanks for listening to the Backpacking Light Podcast. I'm Andrew Marshall, and on behalf of Ryan Jordan, if we can leave you with one parting message, it's this: pack less, be more, because lighter is better. Happy trails, everybody.
So I shoulder my backpack, walk away from the